The Enchantress returns, Chapter 15, Been There, Done That. The balcony doors burst open and Queen Red Riding Hood emerged from the castle. She was dressed in her best gown and was covered in her finest jewelry. Red always dressed to impress when speaking to her people. "Fellow Hydians," Red said with raised arms, "thank you for joining me today." She glanced down at her observers and was disappointed by the lack of attendance. Although the entire kingdom had been invited to hear a message from the Queen, only a crowd of roughly 24 had gathered outside, including 2 sheep and a goat. Red swallowed her pride and went on with her announcement. "I'm assuming many people are too frightened to leave their homes, especially after the disappearance of our beloved wall, so please pass this message along," Red said. "However challenging the current times may be, I have called you all here to encourage your strength and bravery. We have faced great threats in the past and have always overcome them together as a kingdom, and as I look around at your faces, I can see that courage in your eyes. The Enchantress may have taken our wall, but she will never take away our spirit." Red posed for applause, but there was none to accept. "Furthermore," she continued, "if there is one thing the people of the Red Riding Hood Kingdom know how to do, with the exception of the boy who cried wolf, it's survive." Red caught her breath. She had forgotten the rest of her speech. "What was the other point I was going to make, darling?" The young queen spoke outside of her mouth. Luckily for Red, Froggy was standing inside the castle, just on the other side of the balcony doors. "We're going to rebuild the wall," Froggy whispered to her. "Oh, yes, that's right, thank you," Red said, and then refaced her people. "We are going to rebuild our wall." Red struck another pose of grandeur. This time she didn't continue until she heard clapping from the people below. "But before we do that, I'd like to invite all of the carpenters in the kingdom to my castle this afternoon to work on something else. I know it's short notice, but it would mean so much to me," she said. "Thank you for joining me today, Hydians. I wish you all peace and poverty." "Prosperity, my dear, prosperity," Froggy corrected her. "I meant peace and prosperity," Red declared, and then quickly went back inside the castle. As soon as the door shut behind her, Red began taking off her jewelry and passing it to her handmaiden. "Tough crowd," Red said with a sigh. "At least I got all the queen words in there." The twins had been listening to Red's speech with Froggy. "Queen words?" Alex asked. "Yes. Strength, bravery, courage, spirit. The 4 words essential to making a good speech as a queen," Red said, and then quickly changed the subject. "Have all the baskets and dresses been taken down to the courtyard yet?" "Yes, your majesty," the handmaiden said. The twins had awoken in the morning excited to see that the new castle's courtyard had been transformed into a workstation. Red servants piled thousands and thousands of baskets from her collection in one corner of the courtyard and hundreds of her summer dresses in another. Jack had spent the entire night drawing up detailed plans for their flying ship. The blueprints were posted on an enormous board in the center of the courtyard for all to see. "That should do it," Jack said with a huge yawn. "How soon can we expect the builders?" "A few have arrived already, but the rest should be here by noon," Froggy said. Goldilocks scanned the courtyard. "I think we have a problem," she said, and gestured to the pile of dresses. "Who is supposed to make the ship's balloon and sails?" Alex and Connor looked at each other, each hoping the other would have an answer. "Don't look at me," Connor said. "I barely passed home economics. I almost sent the school on fire, pouring cereal, remember?" "I'm not very good with a needle," Alex said. "Do you know of any good seamstresses in the kingdom?" "I've already asked Granny," Red said, happily charging into the courtyard. No one said a word at first, but they were all thinking the same thing. "Are you sure your grandmother is capable of stitching together a balloon and sails for a flying ship, dear?" Froggy bravely asked. "Of course she is," Red said without a silver of doubt. "She and the little old woman who managed the shoe inn will be here later to work on it. They were delighted by the request. Granny's been making my clothes since I was a toddler. Trust me, if there's anyone can do it, it's her." Within the hour, Red's granny and little old woman arrived at the castle with their needles and thread ready. Unlike Mother Goose, these ladies were exactly how the twins had always pictured them. They both had gray hair wrapped into tight buns on the top of their heads, and reading glasses placed on the tips of their noses. The little old woman walked with a cane, and Granny carried a large purse full of yarn and thread. "Thank you so much for coming, Granny," Red said and hugged her grandmother. No problem at all, sweetheart, Granny said. Her voice was soft, slow, and soothing. It's rather nice to have a break from retirement. We can only play cards and watch the grass grow for so many hours in a day before it gets tiresome. What? The little old woman asked loudly. Obviously, she was a little hard of hearing, and if the way she was squinting was an indication, she was also hard of seeing. Granny spoke directly in her ear. I was telling Red that we're happy to be out of the shoe-in. Who's dead? The little old woman asked. Not dead. Red, my granddaughter, Granny said. Your granddaughter's dead? Little old woman said, aghast. Granny turned back to Red. Don't mind her, sweetheart. She has more than 200 grandchildren. Her ears aren't what they used to be. Froggy, Goldilocks, Jack, and the twins were growing more pessimistic by the second. Could these elderly hands be given such a daunting task? This is what we were trying to build, Red said, and showed the old woman the blueprints on the board. Do you think you'll be able to make it? Let's see, Granny said, and pushing up her glasses for a better look. Looks like you got a balloon and sails of some kind, huh? Are you kids going on an adventure? It just so happens we are, Red said with her head raised high. We're going to save the world. That's very nice, sweetheart, Granny said and patted her on the back. She didn't seem too invested in what Red had to say, as if a little girl had told her she was going to the moon. Do you have any fabric, or should I run to the shop? We should have everything we need here, Red said, and gestured to the mountain of her dresses piled in the corner. Well, look at you being thrifty, Grandma said. She took one last glance at the board and at the pile of dresses and nodded. Yes, I think we'll manage just fine. Red jumped and clapped. The others looked more skeptical than ever. Are you positive you can manage? Jack asked. Before he could get an answer, the old woman had sat themselves on stools near the pile of dresses and began ripping their seams apart. Oh, this is nothing, Granny said. Remember that summer you ballooned, Red? Poor dear, you gained so much weight I had to make your new clothes every week. The twins had to bite their fists to keep from laughing. Goldilocks didn't even try to shield her chuckle. You don't say, Goldilocks said with a sly smile. Red blushed a deep shade of her name. Granny, I don't think this is an appropriate time to. That's why I made her the red cloak she's so famous for, Granny said, oblivious to her granddaughter's embarrassment. It was the only thing that would fit her for longer than a week. She used to show up to my house with empty baskets every time I fell ill. I never understood why her mother was sending them to me. Then I figured out Red was eating all the baked goods inside them on her way to my house. No one in the courtyard could hide their laughter after hearing this. Even Froggy let a snicker escape. I was an emotional eater, Red declared in her own defense. I had a lot of things on my mind at the time. She intentionally glanced towards Jack. Thankfully, like all of my clothes, I grew out of that phase. Yes, sweetheart, Granny said. We were all thankful for that, except for the fabric store. Granny and the little old woman both ripped impressively long seams at the same time. The sound made Red cringe even more. Although it had been her idea, Red couldn't bear to watch her dresses be torn apart, or to stick around for her Granny to share any more embarrassing memories. If you all will please excuse me, Red said and headed out of the courtyard. I think I'm going to lie down for a minute. My life has suddenly become a shaky fruit play. Word must have spread through the kingdom, because by noon the courtyard was filled with dozens of builders and carpenters alike, eager to help their young queen. The third little pig was last to arrive, pulling a toolbox half his size behind him. I huffed and I puffed and I dragged this all the way from my home, he told the others. Serves me right for being in the red with Red Queen Red. Jack stood on one of the larger baskets to address the room. Welcome and thank you all so much for coming. I'm afraid the task is large and our time is short, so forgive me for speaking hastily. The Queen has put together a small mission in hopes of salvaging what's left after the Enchantress's return. The mission involves a special ship designed to sail across the clouds rather than the sea, and it must be built in record time. Jack walked across the room to the blueprints. If you could all gather round and take a look, Jack instructed. Our supplies are scarce, but I believe if we follow these plans precisely, we could build this in a matter of days. I won't lecture you with the reasons this project must remain an absolute secret. I'll only repeat that your involvement may finally free the world from the Enchantress's grip. So if you all could be so kind as to lend us your labor, your strength, and your devotion, we can get started immediately and put a stop to this madness once and for all. None of the carpenters objected. His words had encouraged them past the point of questioning. Half of them began stripping the baskets into usable pieces, while the others aligned them and started crafting them together to form the ship's bow. Jack was beaming. For the first time in a long time, he was taking charge of something productive, and he was a great leader. "He's really good at this sort of thing," Alex said to Goldilocks. "Quite good," Goldilocks said, with a bittersweet smile. "He doesn't get as many opportunities to be a hero anymore." Her face was full of pride, but she watched him command the carpenters. The pride was replaced with guilt. Jack had been such a respected and valued member of the Hoodian society. He had thrown it all away in his decision to go on the run with her. Although Goldilocks knew it had to be his own choice, she couldn't help but feel a bit responsible. "Ouch!" Connor shrieked. He had joined the carpenters and kept getting splinters as he stripped the baskets apart. "How are you doing this so easily?" The third little pig stayed silent and simply showed him his hooves. "Gotcha," Connor said. "I've always thought thumbs were overrated." The day flew by as the carpenters worked tirelessly on the ship. Jack was growing anxious, knowing he still had to track down the traveling tradesman. He left Froggy and the third little pig in charge of overseeing the construction after carefully going over his blueprints inch by inch. "This is going to be better than I imagined," Froggy said with a happy hop. "What do you call this contraption?" The third little pig rolled his eyes. "That's a hammer," he said. "So this is a hammer. Interesting," Froggy said and carefully examined it. Despite all that he had been through, he was still a prince at heart. "On second thought, maybe I shouldn't leave," Jack said. "They'll be fine," Goldilocks said and started to drag Jack away from the carpenters. "You're a terrific instructor." Goldilocks and Jack were stopped before they could leave the courtyard. "You two," Red called down from an open window. She was holding a freshly opened white envelope in her hand. "Take the twins with you. I just received word that the fairies are coming to inspect our missing wall, and I don't want those two hanging around when they do." "Oh, man," Connor said. "I was hoping to help with the ship." "Then you should definitely leave," the third little pig said, and yanked a piece of basket out of his hands. "Very well," Goldilocks said. "They can help us track down the traveling tradesman." Alex and Connor had to admit they were a bit excited to go on the hunt. "What am I supposed to tell the fairies when they see all this construction going on?" Red asked. Alex was quick to answer. "Tell them you decided to combine all your baskets into one big basket," she said. Red scrunched her forehead. "Would anyone believe I'd do something like that?" "Yes," the entire courtyard said in unison. Even the carpenters and the old woman were in agreement. Red grunted. "Fine," she said, and promptly shut the window behind her. "We're going to need another horse if the twins are traveling with us," Goldilocks said. "Not to worry," Froggy said. "We have plenty of horses in the stables. You can have your pick of the lot." The twins eagerly ran up to their rooms and collected the things they thought they need, searching for the traveling tradesman. They met Jack and Goldilocks in the castle stables, where they were busy packing supplies onto Goldilocks' infamous cream-colored horse, Porridge. Porridge glanced uneasily at all of the other horses. Goldilocks hadn't been exaggerating. Her horse really didn't care for other horses. And as the twins also glanced around at the perfectly groomed ponies, it wasn't hard to understand why. While Porridge had been out in the world running from the law with her mistress, all of these horses had spent their days in their comfortable stalls. No wonder they didn't get along. "Which horse should we take?" Alex asked. That one," Connor said, and pointed to a large brown stallion in the very back of the stables. "Why that one?" Alex asked. "Because he's the only one that doesn't have bows in his mane," Connor said. "That's Bucket," a stable hand told the twins. "Are you sure you want that one? He can be a tad aggressive." Connor did a lap around the stable to make sure. "Positive," he said. "All the other ones looked like they belong in the doll aisle at a toy store." "Suit yourself," the stable hand said. "But don't say I didn't warn you." He threw a saddle with the largest silver buckles the twins had ever seen over the horse. "Is that why you call him Buckle?" Alex asked. "Partially," the stable hand said. "You'll see." A few minutes later, Jack, Goldilocks, and the twins were off. Jack and Goldilocks led the way on Porridge, while Alex and Connor rode on Buckle a few yards behind them. It didn't take long to figure out why the horse had been given his name. He bucked aggressively every few feet and neighed loudly as he did. Clearly, the silver buckles on the saddle were the only fastener strong enough to keep the saddle on the horse. "How do you turn this thing off?" Connor yelled, clutching the reins as hard as he could. "I think I'm going to be sick," Alex said. Her arms were wrapped around her brother's ribs as tightly as possible without crushing them. Goldilocks steered Porridge around to face Buckle. "Porridge, tell the show-off to stop," Goldilocks said to her horse. Porridge neighed disapprovingly at Buckle, and he stopped bucking immediately. Porridge rolled her eyes at Buckle. Buckle snorted at Porridge almost flirtatiously. It made the twins a little uncomfortable. Obviously, there was a history with the horses, a history they weren't interested in learning. The twins followed Porridge out of the Red Riding Hood Kingdom and into a forest that rested along the Charming Kingdom and Fairy Kingdom border. Jack and Goldilocks were extra wary. The Enchantress had turned the entire world into the dwarf forests. Before they knew it, nightfall was upon them, and they set up a small camp to the side of the path. Alex and Connor laid out some blankets on the ground to sleep on. "This discomfort is almost comforting," Connor said, once he stretched out on the hard ground. "I think I actually miss sleeping in strange forests." "Get used to it," Alex told him. "We've got a lot of adventure ahead of us." "True," Connor said, "but at least this time we'll have friends." Unlike her brother, Alex couldn't sleep. After tossing and turning, she got up and had a seat next to Goldilocks, who was sharpening her sword by a tiny campfire. She kept an eye out while the others slept. "You're not like any other woman I've ever met," Alex told her. "Why is that?" Goldilocks asked. "You're just so confident and self-sufficient," Alex said. "So many girls, especially in my world, are so insecure and jealous. We rely so much on one another, but we're so mean to each other at the same time. We could use more women like you to look up to." Goldilocks was sad to hear it. "I was all those things once," she said. "But after being on the run, I've learned a life spent creating enemies isn't worth leading. Having allies is the best advantage in the world. Jealousy is just a reminder of the frustrations you have with yourself. Who has time to only concentrate on that?" Alex smiled. "That's powerful," she said. "I wish the girls at school could hear that." "Bring a sword to school. Trust me, those girls will leave you alone," Goldilocks said. "Oh, I couldn't do that," Alex said. "Violence is frowned upon in my world. It's not like it is here. It's not needed." Goldilocks liked the sound of that. "Then find out what your sword is, find your own advantage, and wear it proudly. Beat those girls at their own game by seeming perfectly content in your own life," she said. "Then again, I'm a wanted fugitive. I may not be the best person to give advice." Alex laughed. It was some of the best advice she had ever been given, even if it was by a crook. Everyone was up by sunrise the following morning. To pass the time as they searched, Jack and Goldilocks told the twins all about their escapades over the last year on the run. "I knew Goldie could fight, but I had no idea what a warrior she was," Jack said. "There I was, in the Corner Kingdom, surrounded by 20 soldiers. I had just been caught stealing a loaf of bread from a bakery. I didn't have my axe, a sword, or anything. I was helpless. Then, like a cannonball, Goldilocks and Porridge burst through the doors, and Goldie fought off all of the soldiers single-handedly." "No way!" Connor said. "He's embellishing. There were only a dozen soldiers," Goldilocks said with a modest shrug. "Where did you learn to fight, Goldilocks?" Connor asked. "And could you teach me? I've always wanted to be a good swordsman." "When I was younger, I realized no one was going to fight for me, so I picked up a sword and taught myself," Goldilocks said. "I can show you a few tricks if you would like." "Awesome!" Connor said. "I've got really good hand-eye coordination. I have the second highest score on Pac-Man at the arcade." Jack and Goldilocks had no idea if this was supposed to be impressive. "Jack isn't so bad himself, you know," Goldilocks boasted. "Once he saved me from a trio of ogres. I was tied above a large boiling cauldron. They would have made a soup out of me if Jack hadn't got me out there in time." Jack let out an indifferent laugh. I only distracted them long enough for you to untie the knots, he said. She took care of them when she was free. But it's the thought that counts, Goldilocks said and hugged his neck. The tradesman-bound group traveled up and down every path they found, looking everywhere for any sign of him. He should be in this area, Jack said. It's where I found him as a kid. They call him the Traveling Tradesman, but he never goes far. Wait a second, Goldilocks said. She hopped off of Porridge and scanned the dirt path. There were 2 different sets of identical bird tracks on the ground, and stretched a good distance behind and ahead of them. What kind of bird walks for this long? Goldilocks asked. Jack's eyes lit up. The twins didn't know what they were on to, but they knew they were making progress. Goldilocks remounted Porridge, and their group charged down the path as fast as the horses could gallop, following the tracks into the forest ahead. The group eventually discovered an old covered wagon parked to the side of the path. A small chimney poked out of the wagon's roof. The wagon's mule was resting and tied to a nearby tree. Look at the tracks, Alex said and pointed to the ground. The bird tracks led right up to the back of the wagon. It had bird-footed shaped spurs around its wheels. The wagon was leaving bird prints as it traveled down the path. It was an incredibly clever way to cover one's tracks. Tradesman, Jack called out. Is that you in there? All was silent at first. Then a hurried shuffle came from the inside the wagon, and it rocked from side to side. The top half of the wagon's doors burst open, and the traveling tradesman peeked outside. Are you a friend or a foe? The tradesman asked. He was an elderly man with a long gray beard, tattered clothing, and a wandering eye. He had aged a bit since the last time the twins saw him, but he was just as kooky as ever. Friends, Connor happily exclaimed. Old friends, actually. Do you remember us? The tradesmen studied their faces. My boy, I remember every trade I have ever made, the tradesman said. But my mind has grown weary in my old age, and the faces attached have been lost in my memory. Jack and Goldilocks and the twins climbed down from their horses and walked closer to him so he could view them better. You helped us escape the troll and goblin territory a year ago, Alex said. We met you in the dungeons, and you traded your freedom for ours. You told us about the wishing spell. The tradesman stroked his beard, brushing crumbs off of it. He must have been in the middle of a mill. Ah, yes, he said with one squinted eye. I do admit a small sprinkling of familiarity sweeping through me. I wish I had a memory of you, he said to Goldilocks. But you, I think I remember you, he said to Jack. It's been a long time since we were last face to face, Jack said. Perhaps you can remember a lad you traded magic beans to in exchange for a cow. The tradesman's eyes and mouth grew wide with delight. Well, I'll be darned as the legless goat, he said and clapped his hands together. If it isn't Jack, my favorite customer. Jack happily nodded up at him. It's me, old man, he said. It's good to see you again. Come on in, my boy, the tradesman said and opened the lower half of the wagon door. I've just made some peasant pudding. He disappeared in his wagon, and the others took that as a cue to follow him inside. The small wagon was very cramped. A bed was pushed in the back, a tiny table was in the center, and the interior was lined with cabinets and shelves and cages. Canteens, brooms, buckets, daggers, and more were displayed on the shelves and in the cabinets. The twins knew the objects most likely held some gimmicky value and were waiting to be traded. Geese, ducks, and pigs were locked in the cages. No doubt what the tradesman had profited from his recent trades. Have a seat, the tradesman said. Jack, Goldilocks, and the twins forced themselves around the table. The tradesman handed them each a plate of his peasant pudding, which was bits and pieces of unplucked bird floating and mysterious gravy, and a loaf of stale bread. The twins had to hold their noses so they didn't become sick. So what brings you to my neck of the woods, old boy? The tradesman asked Jack with a pat on his back. We've been searching for you, actually, Jack said. And to what do I owe this honor of being the subject of such a quest? The tradesman said. Connor had to replay the sentence in his head before he understood what the tradesman was asking. Jack cautiously looked to the others before confessing. I was wondering if you had any more magic beans, he asked, like the ones you gave to me as a boy. The tradesman's good eye darted around the room. He was honestly surprised by the request. Why would you need more magic beans? He asked. Surely the first batch gave you enough adventure for a lifetime. Indeed they did, Jack said. It's not an adventure we're after, but a way back to the giant's castle. The beanstalk has been removed, and we are hoping to grow another one. The tradesman's good eyes studied each of their faces. But why would you need to revisit the giant's castle at a time like this? He asked. The group looked across the table at one another. Alex decided they didn't have time to beat around the bush and get straight to the point. Have you ever heard of the Wand of Wonderment? Alex asked. The Wand of Wonderment? The tradesman asked. Connor began explaining. It's a wand that you build out of the 6 most prized possessions of the 6 most hated people in the world. The tradesman raised a hand to silence him. Young man, I've known what the Wand of Wonderment is for longer than you've been alive, he said. I just find it hard to comprehend why that would be at the top of your agenda, things being as they are. That's just the thing, Mr. Tradesman. If I may call you Mr. Tradesman, Alex said, we're trying to build it so we can fix the way things are now. We're trying to stop the Enchantress, and it's the only way we know how. The wagon went silent. Everyone sat on edge, questioning Alex's decision to blurt out the truth. Would spilling the beans get them closer to obtaining magical ones? The tradesman sat back in his chair and stroked his beard, gazing back and forth between Alex and Connor. I remember you now, he said softly. I don't recall the exact whereabouts or whenabouts, but I do remember the faces of 2 youngsters on an extraordinary quest. They were ambitious in their pursuit, but they were completely selfless in their attempt. If it wasn't glory they were after, but harmony rather. I decided I'd help them because I know our paths would cross again one day. The twins didn't know what to say. His saving them had been such a kind gesture it still humbled them. I guess your intuition was right, Connor said, only now we're trying to save the world. The tradesman observed them for only a few moments more. He stood up and went to one of the cabinets. He dug through it for a while, pulling out strangely shaped plates and goblets and tools and gadgets before finally removing a small brown bag. The tradesman poured the contents of the little bag onto the table, and the twins found themselves staring down at 3 beans. They were round and wide like lima beans, but were black and bounced lively on the table. Magic beans, Jack said excitedly. You still have some. They're the last I have in my possession, the tradesman said. They aren't easy to come across either. Magic beans have been plucked from a plant that grows in ground fertilized by unicorn manure and watered with the tears of a witch, but they're my gift to you. Everyone sat up in their seats. Are you sure? Goldilocks said. We were prepared to pay you. She pulled a handful of diamonds from outside of her boot. Goldie, where did you get those? Jack asked. I stole them from Red when she wasn't looking. She won't miss them, Goldilocks said. I was assuming we would have to make a trade of some kind. The tradesman scooped the beans up, put them back into the bag, and handed it to Jack. Consider it my little contribution to the people brave enough to take on the evil Enchantress, the tradesman said. That was easy, Connor said. He couldn't believe the luck they had so far. Maybe making this wand won't be so difficult after all. There will be plenty of dangers to be found, I'm afraid, the tradesman said, especially when pursuing the Wand of Wonderment. I would know. I tried building it for myself when I was a young man. You did? Alex asked, unable to contain her surprise. So does that mean it's real? Oh, yes, it's real, I can assure you, he told her. Much like the wishing spell you were after previously, many fools have attempted to create themselves and have died trying. It was during my own pursuit I became the tradesman you see today. I discovered selling trinkets of interest was more profitable than searching for them. Do you know what we should expect then? Connor asked. I can only imagine, the tradesman said. Just remember that even the tamest of places will surprise you with what is lurking in its shadows, and these beads are no exception. Although the giant is dead, there are still dangers waiting for you at the castle. Connor gulped loudly. Do you care to specify? He asked. Young man, if it was in my nature to be specific, I wouldn't be able to look in 2 directions at all times, the tradesman said, and his good eye glared at Connor. Well, we can't thank you enough, Jack said. Kindness is a rare thing to come across in the forest. But it's I who should be thanking you, the tradesman said. After giving you this beans, my sales went through the roof. You gave me my career, old boy. You'll always be like a son to me, Jack. Connor cleared his throat. The kind of son you Rip off in a trade that sends him on a life-threatening adventure? He asked. The tradesman rethought his words. More like a nephew, then, he said. He looked through the wagon door at the darkening evening sky. Where did the time go? You must excuse me now. I must be off before sunset. I never stay more than a day in one place. Sake of the trade, sake of the name. He winked with his good eye, although none could figure out who it was meant for. Good luck, my friends. Jack, Goldilocks, and the twins left the wagon and found their horses. The tradesman hitched up his mule and rolled off into the forest just as the sun began to set. The twins wondered what very special circumstance would be required for them to cross paths with him again. What do you think he meant when he said there are other dangers waiting for us at the giant's castle? Connor asked. The giant didn't leave behind a crazy widow or anything, did he? It's been so long since I was there, Jack said, climbing astride Porridge. The giant was the only terrifying thing I can remember being in the castle. That, of course, and the golden harps singing. The twins and Goldilocks remounted their horses and rode off in the opposite direction of the tradesman, heading back to the Red Riding Hood kingdom. They rode the entire night and arrived the next afternoon to find amazing progress had been made on the flying ship. Red, Froggy, and the third little pig were huddled around the blueprints. Did you find the tradesman? Froggy asked as soon as he saw them arrive. Connor held up the small bag of magic beans. Our first of hopefully many victories, he said. By the way, Froggy, after seeing what that guy ate, I'll never pick on you about lily pad tea again. This looks incredible, Alex said. More than half of the ship looked ready. It should be completed the day after tomorrow, the third little pig said. Jack was hesitant to give his own praise. It looks so much bigger than what my plans proposed, he said. Yes, about that, Froggy said with an apologetic laugh. Queen Red Riding Hood made a few revisions to your plan, the third little pig said. Revisions? Jack said and looked at Red. Well, I figured since I was going to be traveling with you, I would need my own chambers, Red said matter-of-factly. I added a lower deck for me and my things, but don't worry, there's plenty of room for the rest of you on the upper deck. Jack sighed and rubbed his eyes. Goldilocks looked like she was going to strangle someone, so the twins decided to excuse themselves before she did. They could hear Goldilocks and Red arguing as they climbed down the stairs to their bedroom. The sun was about to set on another day, and the twins fell asleep the instant they made contact with their beds. They knew the days ahead would be difficult, but the Wand of Wonderment had finally been confirmed as a real tool for overthrowing the Enchantress, so they focused on that and let that triumphant feeling ease them to sleep. At an hour or so after midnight, Connor awoke with a troubling sensation. He couldn't fight off the feeling he was being watched as he slept. His eyes fluttered open, and as he slowly focused, his heart dropped. Standing at the foot of his bed, intently staring at him, was a woman. She was beautiful and transparent. She had long, flowing hair with a single rose behind her ear. She wore a long nightgown under a robe that was tied at the waist. Although Connor was certain he had never seen her before, she looked oddly familiar. Who are you? Connor stuttered. The woman didn't respond. She glided to the window and pointed to the land in the distance. She looked back at him with a grave expression. What do you want? Connor muttered. The woman said nothing. She held her somber stare and slowly disappeared. Connor's jaw fell open. There was no denying it. He had just seen a ghost.